Imagine being just one decision away from losing everything: your job, your reputation, and the respect of everyone around you. Now, picture the shocking twist. The person you just disrespected is the one who holds the power to change your life forever. Stay tuned to find out how one airline employee's mistake spiraled out of control and how a simple act of arrogance almost cost her everything, until she learned who she had actually crossed. It was just another hectic day at the airport. Sarah, a seasoned employee at one of the busiest terminals in the city, was juggling multiple tasks at once. Passengers rushed past her, checking in for their flights, asking for directions, and dealing with all the usual travel chaos. She'd seen it all before. Her job was to keep things moving, fast. So, when an older woman, slightly hunched and walking with a cane, approached the counter, Sarah barely looked up. She had seen hundreds of passengers like her, struggling to carry their bags, asking for assistance with boarding or finding their gates. Nothing out of the ordinary. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked in a tone that was polite but curt, her eyes already scanning the next line of customers waiting behind the woman. She was trying to be quick, trying to get through the crowd without slowing down the flow of people. The woman, however, was clearly struggling with more than just a heavy suitcase. She looked at Sarah, a little hesitant, and spoke in a soft, tired voice. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, her eyes looking for understanding. "But I have some trouble walking, and I would really appreciate some help getting to the gate." Sarah, already feeling the pressure of the growing line behind her, sighed quietly. She wasn't in the mood for extra work today. After all, she had a schedule to keep. There were so many things to do and so many people to help. She glanced at the woman, then back at the line of waiting passengers. With a dismissive wave of her hand, Sarah muttered, "You'll be fine. The gate's just down the hall. You don't need me to walk you there." The woman's face fell for a moment, but she nodded quietly, clearly disappointed. She didn't argue. After all, she had been in airports before, and she knew what it felt like to be a burden. But Sarah didn't care. She was already turning to the next passenger, not noticing the woman's hesitation as she slowly shuffled away, her cane tapping softly on the floor with each step. Sarah, too busy to think much more about it, went back to her duties. It was just another encounter in a long line of daily tasks. Little did she know, the woman she had just brushed off was someone who could easily change her life forever. But, for now, that thought hadn't even crossed Sarah's mind. She had done her job. She had helped countless people in similar situations. What was one more passenger to her? As Sarah continued to check in passengers and direct them to their gates, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that the line was finally thinning out. It had been one of those days where every second felt like a minute too long, and she was ready to wrap things up. But while Sarah was busy with the usual tasks, the older woman, whom she had just dismissed, was quietly making her way through the terminal. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for anyone's help. Instead, she simply walked slowly, carefully, her cane clicking softly against the polished floors. Mary Albright, the woman Sarah had brushed aside, wasn't like most of the passengers Sarah was used to dealing with. She wasn't a tourist or a businesswoman on a quick trip. Mary was a private individual, rich, powerful, and influential, though you wouldn't know it by her appearance. Dressed in modest clothes and a simple jacket, she blended in with the crowd, trying to keep her movements discreet, as if she preferred not to draw attention to herself. But for those who knew her, there was no mistaking who she was. She hadn't come to the airport to make a fuss. She wasn't interested in causing a scene. She had enough to deal with in her life without adding the stress of arguing over something as simple as a little assistance. Yet, as she walked slowly toward her gate, she couldn't help but think about the interaction she'd just had with Sarah. It wasn't about the help she had requested. It was about something else. The dismissive attitude, the assumption that her needs didn't matter. Mary didn't expect special treatment, but she did expect respect. What Sarah didn't know was that Mary wasn't just any regular passenger. She was the owner of the very airline Sarah worked for, the company that was flying thousands of passengers around the world every day. The same airline Sarah worked for, earning her paycheck. But as Mary walked, her mind wasn't on Sarah or the way she had been treated. She was focused on catching her flight, one of the many she needed to take in order to oversee the business that was her empire. Meanwhile, Sarah continued on with her day, completely unaware that her careless dismissal was about to cause more trouble than she could ever have imagined. Mary's quiet departure from the counter was just the beginning of something much larger. A small, seemingly insignificant mistake was about to come back around, and Sarah had no idea what was coming for her. As the hours ticked by, Sarah's day continued to move at a fast pace. She didn't give the incident with the older woman another thought. After all, there were always more passengers to check in, more requests to handle, and more things to do. It was just part of the job. Little did Sarah know, her routine was about to be interrupted in the most unexpected way. Around mid-afternoon, Sarah was standing behind the counter, looking over some documents, when a figure appeared at the edge of the terminal. A tall man in a dark suit, carrying a tablet and speaking quickly into his earpiece, walked briskly toward her. His face was serious, almost urgent. He glanced at Sarah, then nodded to a colleague nearby, and then returned his focus to her. "Sarah, can you step into the office for a moment?" he asked, his tone cool and professional. Sarah, slightly confused but not concerned, followed him down the narrow hallway to a back office that she'd never visited before. She had no idea what this was about. Maybe a customer complaint, or a request for assistance from management. She had dealt with both before, but she had no clue that the next few moments would change her life forever. The office was stark, with a few chairs and a desk cluttered with papers. Behind the desk sat a man in a sharp suit who introduced himself as Mr. Davis, a senior manager at the airline. He didn't smile. In fact, his expression was stern. Sarah's heart began to race. Something felt off, but she couldn't quite place it. "Sit down, Sarah," Mr. Davis said. "We need to discuss an incident that occurred earlier today." Sarah nodded and sat, trying to keep her calm. She racked her brain for any mistakes she might have made during the day. Was it a customer complaint? Had she missed something during check-in? But, as Mr. Davis continued, Sarah's nerves began to grow. "We've received a report about a passenger who was treated poorly at your counter earlier today," Mr. Davis began, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of the conversation. "This passenger, Sarah, is a very important person." Sarah's brow furrowed. The vague nature of his words only made her more anxious. "I'm afraid you didn't provide the level of service expected by our customers," Mr. Davis continued. "In fact, it's been reported that you dismissed her request for assistance outright." Sarah's face flushed. She knew exactly who he was talking about, the older woman with the cane. Her heart dropped as the realization hit. Was this really what all the fuss was about? One request for help? One passenger? It didn't seem that serious. "She's already aware of the incident, but we need to understand what happened from your side. Can you explain why you treated her the way you did?" Mr. Davis pressed. Before Sarah could even form an answer, Mr. Davis leaned forward, his expression changing. His voice lowered, and he looked at her with a hard edge. "That passenger. She's not just anyone. She's the owner of this entire airline fleet." The words landed like a bomb. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This was some sort of joke, right? How could the woman she'd brushed off be the owner of the airline? She looked up at Mr. Davis, searching for any sign that he was kidding. But there was nothing. The seriousness of his face told her everything she needed to know. "You see, Sarah," Mr. Davis continued, "that was Mary Albright, the majority shareholder of this company. She owns more than just an airline ticket. She owns this entire operation." Sarah felt a wave of panic rush over her. Her mind raced as she tried to process the magnitude of what she had just done. How had she not known? How had she not recognized her? This wasn't just a mistake. This was a catastrophic blunder, and Sarah was suddenly acutely aware that the consequences were far greater than anything she had imagined. Her refusal to help Mary was no longer just a simple act of impatience. It was a direct affront to the person who could change everything for Sarah, the very person who could control her future within the company. Suddenly, Sarah felt the weight of her own ignorance, and it was sinking in fast. Sarah sat frozen in the chair, the words echoing in her mind. The owner of the entire airline fleet. She tried to swallow, but the lump in her throat made it difficult. Her mind raced as she replayed the events of the day over and over again. How could she have been so careless? The woman she had dismissed so easily was no ordinary passenger. She was the heart of the airline's empire. As Mr. Davis continued speaking, Sarah barely registered the words. She was lost in a fog of disbelief, her own voice almost a distant sound in her head, asking herself the same question over and over. Why didn't I recognize her? Mary Albright wasn't just any elderly woman traveling with a cane. She was the face of the company. Sarah had seen her face on corporate documents, in company newsletters, and even in a few interviews on the news. But in the chaos of the airport, amidst the rush of passengers and the constant noise, Sarah hadn't thought twice. She had assumed Mary was just another passenger, someone to rush through so she could get to the next one. But the consequences of her mistake were far more severe than a simple apology. Mr. Davis leaned back in his chair, clearly waiting for Sarah to respond. But all she could do was sit there, her face burning with embarrassment and regret. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. What could she say? There was no excuse for her actions, no way to justify the dismissive attitude she had shown toward someone so important. "We've already spoken with Mary," Mr. Davis continued, his tone serious but not unkind. "She didn't want to cause any drama, but she made it clear that she doesn't take kindly to being treated like that. And as much as she values good service, she values respect more. That's what this is about, Sarah." Respect his words stung more than she expected. Sarah wasn't used to being reprimanded, especially not for something she considered so trivial. In her mind, it had been just another busy day, another passenger, another task to get through. But now, in the quiet of this office, she realized just how wrong she had been. "I understand," Sarah finally managed to say, her voice small and shaky. I didn't know. I didn't realize who she was." Mr. Davis gave her a small nod, his face softening slightly. "No one expects you to know every passenger personally, but there's something to be said for taking the time to listen. It's not just about what you can do for the company, Sarah. It's about how you make people feel." The words hit her hard, sinking deep into her chest. She had spent so much time rushing through her tasks, trying to meet quotas and deadlines, that she had forgotten the core of what customer service was really about. It wasn't just about checking off boxes. It was about treating people with kindness, dignity, and respect, regardless of who they were or what role they played. The silence in the room grew thick. Sarah's thoughts raced as she processed everything. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had misjudged someone in a way that could cost her far more than just a reprimand. And then the worst part hit her. Mary could have easily made this a much bigger issue. She could have demanded Sarah be fired on the spot. She could have written a scathing review that would tarnish Sarah's career permanently. But Mary hadn't done that. She had shown restraint, choosing to give Sarah a chance, something that made Sarah feel even worse. Mary hadn't taken immediate revenge. Instead, she had let Sarah stew in her own regret, a punishment that was far more excruciating than anything else. "I'll make sure this doesn't happen again," Sarah finally said, her voice steadier now, though still tinged with regret. She knew she couldn't undo what she had done, but she would do everything in her power to ensure it wouldn't happen again. Mr. Davis nodded once more, the conversation winding down. "This is your warning, Sarah. It's your chance to learn. Take it seriously." As Sarah stood to leave the office, her mind was heavy with the weight of her mistake. She had let a simple act of impatience cloud her judgment, and now she had to live with the consequences. What made it worse was that the person she had wronged wasn't just anyone. She had insulted the very person who held the key to her future. And the worst part? She couldn't even begin to imagine what would happen next. The next few days passed in a blur for Sarah. She tried to focus on her work, but the sting of her mistake kept lingering in her mind, reminding her that she had crossed a line she never should have. It felt like everyone around her was unaware of the incident, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that things were different now. She couldn't look at the terminal the same way, and every time a passenger approached her counter, she wondered if they knew what had happened. Did they know that she had been the one who'd brushed off the owner of the entire airline? But nothing prepared Sarah for what came next. It was a normal Thursday morning when the news broke, in the most public way possible. As Sarah was finishing her shift, she overheard a group of her colleagues gossiping in the break room, talking animatedly about some breaking news. At first, she thought it was about a weather delay or a canceled flight, but when she heard the words Mary Albright and incident at the counter, her heart skipped a beat. "Oh, you didn't hear?" one of her co-workers, Lisa, said with a raised eyebrow. "Turns out, the old lady who was treated like garbage by one of our own employees is the owner of the airline. Can you imagine? The whole fleet. She owns it." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She knew instantly what Lisa was talking about. That old lady was Mary Albright, and that employee was her. Sarah stood frozen, listening to the conversation as it unfolded. Lisa continued, oblivious to Sarah's presence. "I heard she's not happy about how she was treated. There's talk about a press release going out about it. Can you believe that? A whole press conference over one bad interaction." The blood drained from Sarah's face as she heard her co-workers laugh and shake their heads in disbelief. "This is gonna be huge," another co-worker added. "I mean, she owns the place. Imagine the drama when everyone finds out." It felt like the walls were closing in on Sarah. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. A press release? A press conference? She had thought the situation was bad when she realized Mary was the owner, but this was something else entirely. Now, the story was going public, and there was no escaping it. Her stomach twisted in knots. The incident had already been reported to management, but now it was going to hit the media. Sarah could only imagine the headlines. Airline employee snubs disabled passenger, not knowing she owns the entire fleet. It was going to be a disaster. She felt humiliated, exposed, and, worst of all, powerless. But what really struck Sarah was how quickly things were spiraling out of control. It wasn't just a matter of an employee's mistake anymore. It was about the reputation of the airline, the company she worked for. And Mary wasn't just the owner. She was an influential businesswoman with a large following. If she chose to make an example of Sarah, it could change everything. Her career could be over. The thought was almost too much to bear. That afternoon, when Sarah left for the day, she found herself avoiding the eyes of her colleagues. She could feel the weight of their judgment on her, even though they hadn't said a word. They all knew what had happened, and soon the entire world would too. Later that evening, the news broke. The airline issued a formal statement confirming that the passenger involved in the incident had, in fact, been Mary Albright. The statement apologized for the employee's behavior, and while it didn't name Sarah specifically, it was clear who was being referenced. The apology felt like a slap in the face to Sarah. She couldn't help but feel the sting of it, knowing that the company had to address her mistake on a public platform. But it wasn't the apology that made the most impact. It was the announcement that Mary Albright, after considering the situation, had chosen to take no immediate legal action. She hadn't fired Sarah, as many had feared. Instead, she had made a personal decision to forgive the employee, but only after a private conversation about respect, humility, and customer service. For Sarah, this felt like both a relief and a punishment. Mary hadn't chosen the harshest route, but the fact that she had taken the time to address the issue directly with Sarah meant that it was still very much a problem, one that Sarah couldn't just forget. It also meant that the world would know, whether they liked it or not, that an airline employee had been caught making a massive mistake. The pressure of that public revelation hung over Sarah's head. It was the kind of mistake that wasn't easily swept under the rug. But perhaps, just maybe, this public moment of reckoning would be the lesson Sarah needed to truly understand the importance of respect, not just in customer service, but in every interaction she had from now on. The next day, Sarah walked into work with a heavy heart. She could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her as she passed through the terminal. Whispers followed her footsteps, and though no one spoke directly to her, she knew they were all aware of what had happened. Her colleagues, who had once casually exchanged pleasantries with her, now seemed distant, as if there was a barrier between them and the incident. She had become a cautionary tale. But what truly caught her off guard was when she received an unexpected call just before her shift. It was from Mary Albright herself. Sarah's hand trembled as she picked up the phone. She had no idea what to expect. Would Mary be calling to reprimand her further? Would she demand that Sarah be fired immediately? The thought made Sarah's stomach churn. "Hello, Sarah." Mary's voice was calm, but there was an underlying firmness to it that made Sarah's heart race. Yes, this is Sarah. I wasn't expecting." "I know you weren't," Mary interrupted gently. "I just wanted to speak to you personally." Sarah's mind whirled. Was this a setup? Was this the moment she was going to be called out in front of her bosses? She braced herself. "I'm sure you're aware of the statement that went out to the press," Mary continued. and you've probably heard the rumors by now, but I wanted to clear a few things up. With you, directly." Sarah nodded, even though Mary couldn't see her. She couldn't find her voice. Mary's tone softened. "I want to be clear, Sarah. What happened at the counter was not acceptable, but that's not the end of it. What matters now is how you handle it, and how you learn from it." Sarah took a deep breath. "I understand," she said, her voice small but sincere. "I've learned my lesson. I never should have treated you like that." There was a long pause on the line before Mary spoke again. "I don't expect an apology, Sarah. I expect change. You work in customer service, and that means you serve all people, without judgment, without assumptions. It doesn't matter who they are. You could be serving the president of a country, or you could be serving the person who owns the airline. You treat them the same, with respect, always." Sarah felt her chest tighten. She knew Mary was right. She had made a snap judgment based on how the woman appeared, rather than looking at her as a person. And now, she was being given a second chance to make it right. But she had to prove herself. "Thank you for this chance," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mary didn't respond immediately, and for a moment, Sarah wondered if she had said something wrong. But then Mary's voice came through again, this time with a hint of understanding. "Don't waste it, Sarah. Everyone makes mistakes. It's how we move forward that matters." And just like that, the call ended. Sarah sat there, phone pressed to her ear, staring into space. She had been given a rare opportunity to make things right. But could she really change? Could she prove that she had learned from her mistake, not just to Mary, but to everyone else who had been watching? Her mind spun with uncertainty, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about keeping her job anymore. It was about her own growth, her ability to learn, and her commitment to treating others with the respect they deserved. As the weeks went by, Sarah tried to put her conversation with Mary into practice. It wasn't easy. The weight of what had happened still hung over her. The whispers in the hallways, the knowing glances from her colleagues, it all reminded her of her mistake. But Sarah was determined to change. She had been given a second chance, and she wasn't about to throw it away. At first, it was small things, paying more attention to the needs of the passengers, offering help before they even asked for it, listening carefully to their concerns. But as Sarah continued to work, she found that her attitude towards her job began to shift in ways she hadn't expected. She started to look at people differently. Instead of rushing to get through her tasks, she took the time to notice the little things. The way a family struggled with heavy luggage, the way an elderly passenger looked uncertain at the gate. These were the moments that mattered. One afternoon, a few weeks after her conversation with Mary, Sarah was working at the check-in counter when a man approached her. He was middle-aged, dressed in a suit, and seemed to be in a hurry. Sarah instantly recognized the familiar signs of stress, the rushed movements, the tight grip on his suitcase. Instead of jumping into the routine of checking his ticket and sending him on his way, Sarah stopped and smiled at him. "Is there anything I can help you with today?" she asked, her tone warm and genuine. The man blinked, clearly caught off guard by the kindness. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Actually, yes. I'm running a little late for my flight, and I'm not sure where to go." Sarah guided him through the process, taking extra care to make sure he didn't feel rushed. By the time he was finished, he turned to her with a grateful smile. "Thank you," he said. "You've really made this so much easier." As he walked away, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about treating people the way she herself wanted to be treated, respectfully, with patience, with kindness. It was moments like these that helped Sarah realize she wasn't just working to redeem herself in Mary's eyes. She was working to redeem herself in her own. The road to change wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. But Sarah was learning, not just how to do her job better, but how to be a better person. And in doing so, she realized that the lessons Mary had taught her went far beyond a single mistake. It was about the journey, the willingness to face your flaws, to grow, and always strive to be better. As the days passed, Sarah continued her journey of self-improvement, quietly working to earn back the respect she had lost. She didn't expect any recognition for her efforts, nor did she seek validation from her colleagues. The work itself was enough. But sometimes, life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. It was late on a Friday afternoon when the unexpected happened. Sarah was at her usual spot behind the counter, dealing with the last few flights of the day. The airport was quieter now, the rush of passengers beginning to dwindle as evening set in. Sarah was in the middle of checking in a family when she heard someone calling her name. "Sarah, excuse me." She looked up, expecting to see another impatient traveler, but to her surprise it was one of the senior managers from the airline. His name was Mr. Lawson, a man she'd never had much direct contact with. He was known for being tough but fair, and his presence at the check-in counter was unexpected. "Yes, Mr. Lawson?" Sarah asked, trying to mask the surprise in her voice. Mr. Lawson smiled, an expression Sarah rarely saw on his face. "I wanted to talk to you for a moment." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Was this it? Was he about to tell her that her time was up, that her slip-up had finally caught up with her? He gestured for her to step aside. As they walked to a quieter corner of the terminal, he spoke again. "I've been hearing some very positive things about you recently," Mr. Lawson began, his tone genuine. "From both passengers and your colleagues. Word is, you've been going above and beyond in your work, being more attentive, more patient, and treating everyone with the kind of respect that we expect from our employees." Sarah blinked in surprise. This was not the conversation she had expected. I didn't realize people had noticed," she said, trying to keep her composure. "They have," Mr. Lawson continued. "I've been watching, too. It's clear you've learned from your past mistake, and you're committed to improving not just as an employee, but as a person." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. The praise was unexpected, but it meant more to her than anything she had received in weeks. She had worked so hard to prove herself, not just to the company, but to herself. And now, someone had noticed. "I just wanted you to know," Mr. Lawson said, his voice softening. "We're all human. We make mistakes. What matters is what we do after those mistakes. And from what I can see, you've turned it around." Sarah's throat tightened, but she managed to hold back the tears. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It means a lot to me." Mr. Lawson nodded and gave her a final smile before turning to walk away. "Keep it up, Sarah. You're on the right path." As he disappeared into the crowd, Sarah stood there for a moment, trying to process everything. She had been given a second chance, and while she had been worried about the fallout from her mistake, this moment of recognition was the confirmation she needed. She was on the right track. The lessons she had learned had shaped her into someone she was proud of, someone who had overcome a challenging chapter and emerged stronger because of it. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like she belonged, not just in her job, but in the world around her. Weeks turned into months, and the incident that had once threatened to derail Sarah's career began to fade into the background. She still carried the lesson with her every day, but she no longer felt defined by that one mistake. The whispers and glances from her colleagues had died down, replaced by a quiet respect that Sarah had worked hard to earn. Her actions spoke for themselves now. One day, just as Sarah was finishing her shift, she saw a familiar face approaching the counter. It was Mary Albright, the woman she had once so thoughtlessly dismissed. For a moment, Sarah felt a pang of anxiety. Would Mary remember her? Would she bring up the past? Sarah had moved on, but what about Mary? She was still the owner of the airline after all, and that memory could resurface at any time. But as Mary reached the counter, she smiled at Sarah, her expression warm. "Hello, Sarah," she greeted, her tone kind but direct. "How's everything going here?" Sarah froze, unsure of how to respond. She'd expected something more formal, maybe even cold. But Mary's approach was nothing like that. She seemed to genuinely care. "It's going well," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I've been learning a lot, trying to be more mindful of the way I treat people." Mary nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I'm glad to hear that," she said. "I've been keeping track of your progress." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "You have?" Mary's smile widened slightly. "I've noticed the changes in you, Sarah. It's not just the way you treat passengers now. It's the way you treat your colleagues, too. That speaks volumes." For a brief moment, Sarah felt like she might choke up. The words Mary spoke were everything she had hoped to hear. Validation, recognition, and, most importantly, forgiveness. It was the final piece of the puzzle. In that moment, Sarah knew she had truly turned a corner. Not just because Mary had forgiven her, but because Sarah had learned to forgive herself. "I appreciate that, Mary," Sarah said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I'm really trying. Thank you for giving me the chance to make things right." Mary paused for a moment, as if considering something. "I always believe that people can change, Sarah," she said finally. "You've proven that." With that, Mary turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing at the counter, a sense of peace washing over her. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. Her actions had spoken for themselves, and now she had the approval of the very person she had wronged. It was the closure she needed. In the end, Sarah realized that the real lesson wasn't just about customer service or even about respect. It was about resilience, the ability to rise after a fall, to learn from mistakes, and to grow into a person who could face their flaws with honesty. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And now, with the lessons she had learned, Sarah was ready for whatever came next, because she knew she could handle it. The end of one chapter marked the beginning of another, and Sarah was ready to write it. A few weeks after her conversation with Mary, Sarah received an unexpected call that would once again change the course of her career. It was a Monday morning, and she had just settled into her shift when her phone buzzed. It was an internal call from the HR department. "Sarah, can you come up to the office for a moment?" the voice on the other end asked. Her heart skipped. What now? She wondered if something had gone wrong, maybe an issue with a passenger or a new concern from management. But she quickly pushed those thoughts aside, trying to remain calm. It was just a meeting, after all. As Sarah walked down the hall toward the HR office, her mind raced. She tried to convince herself that it was just a routine check-in, or perhaps a new company initiative she needed to be aware of. But as she entered the office and saw Mr. Lawson sitting at the desk alongside a woman she didn't recognize, She felt a little unease settle in her stomach. "Come in, Sarah," Mr. Lawson greeted with a smile, gesturing for her to sit. "We've been meaning to speak with you." The woman, sitting across from Mr. Lawson, smiled warmly, though there was an air of authority about her. "I'm Lisa Turner," she introduced herself. "I'm the new director of customer service. I've been reviewing the performance of some of our employees, and your name came up." Sarah's heart raced, and she tried to hide her nervousness. "Is everything okay?" Lisa nodded. "Everything's fine. In fact, I've heard some very positive feedback from passengers and your colleagues about how much you've improved. I know it's not always easy, but I wanted to tell you that we've been very impressed with the way you've handled yourself, especially after the incident with Mary." Mr. Lawson added, "It's not just about the work you do, Sarah. It's about the way you've managed to grow from that mistake. We see potential in you, and we think you're ready for a new role." Sarah's brow furrowed, her mind struggling to process what they were saying. A new role? What could they possibly be offering her? Lisa leaned forward slightly. "We'd like to offer you a position in the Customer Service Leadership Program. It's a development track for employees who have demonstrated exceptional growth and leadership potential. It's a big step up, but we believe you're ready." Sarah blinked, stunned. The room seemed to blur around her as she tried to absorb the magnitude of what they were offering. She had spent so many months focused on correcting her mistakes, on proving herself worthy of respect again, that the idea of being promoted had never even crossed her mind. Mr. Lawson smiled at her reaction. "We've seen the way you interact with passengers now, the way you manage pressure, and the way you've turned your past experiences into something positive. This is a chance for you to move up, Sarah, a real opportunity to lead and teach others." For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak. She had been working so hard just to keep her job, to regain her confidence, that the idea of stepping into a leadership role seemed almost impossible. But deep down, she knew this was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she could prove that all her efforts had led to something real. I don't know what to say," Sarah finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. "I never expected anything like this." Lisa smiled again, her tone kind but firm. "You've earned it, Sarah. We believe in you." As Sarah left the HR office, her mind was spinning. She had been given a chance not just to redeem herself, but to grow beyond the mistakes of her past. This new opportunity was a turning point in her career, a chance to take everything she had learned, everything she had worked for, and use it to help others. It felt like a dream, but Sarah knew it was real, and as she walked back to her desk, she realized something important. She was no longer defined by her mistake. She had learned from it, grown because of it, and now it had led her to a brighter future. The first day of her new role was a mix of excitement and nerves. Sarah had spent years in the airline industry, but now, stepping into a leadership position, everything felt different. She wasn't just an employee anymore. She was a mentor, a guide for others who might be going through their own struggles, and that was a responsibility she took seriously. Her new role in the Customer Service Leadership Program meant she would be working with new hires, training them in everything she had learned about the job, from handling customers with care to managing the pressure that came with the job. She would be teaching others how to provide excellent service, how to handle difficult situations with grace, and how to maintain a calm and respectful demeanor, no matter the circumstances. As Sarah entered the training room for her first session, she was greeted by a small group of eager new recruits. They looked at her with a mix of curiosity and respect. She was no longer the rookie behind the counter. She was the one they would look to for guidance, the one they would turn to when they needed help. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a deep sense of purpose. She was no longer just a passenger service agent. She was part of something bigger. She was helping shape the future of the company, helping others avoid the mistakes she had made, and showing them the importance of respect, empathy, and growth. "Welcome to the program," Sarah said, standing in front of the group. "I know that many of you are here because you want to be part of something important, to make a difference in people's lives, and trust me, you can. But you need to remember one thing. The way you treat others matters more than anything else. Whether it's a passenger or a colleague, always show respect. Always be kind." As she spoke, Sarah felt a wave of confidence wash over her. This was where she was meant to be. The lessons she had learned, the mistakes she had made, had all led her to this moment. And now, it was her turn to make a difference in the lives of others. Her journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been incredibly rewarding. And as she looked at the faces of the new recruits in front of her, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. She had come a long way, but the road ahead was even brighter. The lessons she had learned from her past would guide her as she helped others find their way. It wasn't just about redeeming herself anymore. It was about using what she had learned to create a better future for others. And that, Sarah realized, was the greatest reward of all. As Sarah settled into her new role, she quickly realized that leadership wasn't just about teaching the technical skills of the job. It was about creating an atmosphere where respect, empathy, and personal growth were encouraged. She had been given the opportunity to shape the next generation of employees, and with every day that passed, she grew more passionate about making that impact. Her training sessions weren't just about procedures or protocols. They were about creating relationships, understanding people, and fostering a culture of trust. Sarah would often find herself sharing stories, not just about the technical side of the job, but about the personal lessons she had learned from her own mistakes. She was open with her recruits, telling them about the time she had dismissed a passenger who, unbeknownst to her, was the owner of the entire airline. It wasn't an easy story to tell, but it was one that always made an impression. "Don't ever make assumptions about anyone," she would tell her trainees. "You never know who you're talking to. Every person deserves the same level of respect, no matter who they are or what they're wearing. And if you ever make a mistake, own it, learn from it, and move forward." Her transparency resonated with the recruits. They appreciated her honesty, her willingness to show vulnerability. It made her more than just a trainer. It made her a mentor, someone they could relate to, someone who understood the challenges they were facing. And the ripple effect was immediate. Sarah noticed that the team dynamics began to change. The new hires, once unsure and nervous, began to interact with passengers in a more confident and compassionate way. They were more patient, more attentive, and more willing to help each other out when problems arose. One day, after a particularly busy shift, one of the new recruits, Emma, approached Sarah with a grateful smile. "Sarah, I just wanted to say thank you," Emma said, her voice sincere. "When you told us about your story, about how you learned from your mistake, it really made me think. I've been working here for a while now, and I never realized how important it was to treat every person with respect. Not just because it's part of the job, but because it matters." Sarah smiled warmly, feeling a deep sense of pride in Emma's words. "I'm glad it helped," Sarah said. "Sometimes the most important lessons aren't about the job itself, but about how we treat each other. That's what makes us better at what we do." As the weeks passed, Sarah noticed that the culture around her was changing. The new hires weren't just learning how to do their jobs better, they were learning how to be better, how to approach every interaction with a sense of humility and respect. And that was something Sarah could be proud of, because it wasn't just her growth anymore. It was a collective transformation, one that was spreading through the team. Her own growth had been hard-fought, but it had led her to a place where she could give back. She wasn't just teaching employees the logistics of the job, she was teaching them the importance of being a good person, of bringing empathy and understanding into everything they did. And the best part was, it wasn't just about the people she was training. It was about everyone around her, her colleagues, her supervisors, and even the passengers who walk through the airport every day. The change was spreading, and it was starting to create a culture of care, both inside and outside the company. One afternoon, during a meeting with senior management, Sarah was approached by Lisa Turner, the director of customer service, who had been keeping an eye on the impact Sarah was having on the team. "You've really made a difference here, Sarah," Lisa said, her tone appreciative. "I've noticed how your team has responded to your leadership. It's not just about the numbers anymore. The overall environment here is improving because of you. We're seeing higher customer satisfaction ratings, but more importantly, we're seeing more positivity among the staff. That's the kind of leadership we need." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but also a deep sense of gratitude. She had come a long way since that fateful day when she had made that mistake. But what she realized now was that it wasn't just about her redemption. It was about creating something that would last, a ripple effect that could extend beyond her and change the culture of the entire organization. The lessons she had learned from her own downfall had shaped her into a better leader, a better colleague, and a better person. And now, she was seeing those lessons reflected in the people she trained and worked with. The cycle of growth, learning, and improvement was continuous, and Sarah felt incredibly fortunate to be a part of it. As the days went by, Sarah's role continued to evolve. She wasn't just a leader in her department, she was becoming a beacon for others in the company. Her story of growth had inspired more than just her recruits. It had inspired her colleagues, and it had given everyone in the company a renewed sense of purpose. For Sarah, this wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about the impact she could have on her team, on her company, and on the passengers who walked through the airport every day. She had learned that mistakes, though painful, could be the catalyst for real change. And now, she was committed to making that change, one day at a time. As Sarah continued her journey as a leader, she soon realized that the lessons she had shared with others were now being put to the test in ways she hadn't anticipated. The airline, like every business, faced its challenges. There were days when things didn't go as smoothly as planned, when passengers were upset, when the system malfunctioned, or when staff became overwhelmed. These were the moments that would truly define her as a leader, not just her ability to teach, but her ability to stay calm under pressure and handle crises with the same respect and empathy she had been teaching. One evening, during a particularly busy rush hour, Sarah found herself dealing with an irate passenger at the check-in counter. The flight had been delayed due to weather, and a number of passengers were understandably frustrated. But one man, in particular, seemed to be taking his anger out on everyone around him. He shouted at the staff, slammed his luggage onto the counter, and demanded to be rebooked immediately. Sarah's first instinct was to feel the stress of the situation, to panic as she had done in the past. The old reflex, the urge to rush through the interaction, to appease the customer quickly, to avoid confrontation, was strong. But then she remembered the lessons she had learned. She took a deep breath and approached the passenger calmly, keeping her voice steady. "Sir, I understand you're frustrated, and I'm really sorry for the inconvenience. I'm here to help, and I'll do everything I can to get you where you need to be," she said, maintaining eye contact and speaking slowly. The passenger, who had been shouting, paused for a moment. It wasn't the response he expected. Sarah's calmness seemed to disarm him, and for a second the anger in his voice faded. "I just need to know when I'll get to my destination," the passenger said, his voice now less forceful but still tinged with frustration. "I understand. Let me look into this for you right away. We're doing everything we can to get everyone on their way as soon as possible," Sarah responded, taking a moment to check the system and reassure the passenger that a solution was being worked on. The situation didn't immediately resolve, but by staying calm and respectful, Sarah was able to diffuse the tension. She didn't promise an instant fix. She simply made the passenger feel heard and valued, and that alone was enough to shift the dynamic. After a few minutes, Sarah found an available flight for the passenger and calmly explained the details. The man, though still frustrated by the delay, thanked her and left the counter with a much more composed attitude than when he had first arrived. As the incident came to a close, Sarah exhaled deeply. It had been a test of her patience, her communication, and her ability to lead in moments of crisis. And for the first time, she realized that she had passed. She didn't need to rush or make promises she couldn't keep. She just needed to be present, listen, and act with respect. Her colleagues, who had been watching from a distance, quietly nodded in approval. They had seen Sarah in action, and her calm handling of the situation had set the tone for the rest of the team. As the tension in the terminal slowly lifted, Sarah felt a quiet sense of pride. Leadership, she had learned, wasn't just about leading others. It was about staying grounded when things got tough and making sure those around you felt supported, no matter the circumstances. Months passed, and Sarah's transformation was evident not only to her team, but also to herself. She had come a long way from the day she had dismissed Mary Albright at the check-in counter. The once naive, impatient employee had grown into a leader who knew the value of respect, understanding, and taking the time to listen to others. And though she had faced numerous challenges along the way, including moments of doubt, frustration, and fatigue, she felt stronger and more confident than ever. One afternoon, as she was wrapping up another training session, she received a message. It was a meeting request from the senior management team. A bit nervous but eager to find out what it was about, Sarah made her way to the conference room, unsure of what to expect. When she arrived, she was greeted by several familiar faces, including Mr. Lawson and Lisa Turner. There was another person there too, someone she hadn't seen before, an executive from the company's corporate office. "Sarah, thank you for joining us," Mr. Lawson began. "We've been following your progress closely, and we're really impressed with the work you've been doing. Your leadership has had a significant impact on your team, and we believe it's time to recognize that." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. Was this another evaluation? Had something gone wrong? Lisa smiled warmly. "We wanted to discuss an opportunity for you. You've shown incredible growth, not just as an employee, but as a leader, and we believe it's time for you to take on a new challenge." The executive from the corporate office stepped forward. "Sarah, we've been talking about expanding the leadership program across more locations, and we'd like you to take on a larger role. We're offering you a position as a regional manager. overseeing multiple locations in the area. This will give you a chance to expand the culture of respect, service, and leadership that you've fostered in your current role." The room went silent for a moment as Sarah processed the words. A regional manager. The idea seemed so far from the position she had been in just a year ago. She had gone from being the employee who made a costly mistake to being offered a leadership role that would shape the company's future. I don't know what to say," Sarah finally stammered, overwhelmed by the offer. "This is an incredible opportunity, but it's also a big step. I don't know if I'm ready." Lisa placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "We wouldn't be offering this if we didn't believe in you. You've already proven that you're ready for this, Sarah. We've seen the way you lead, the way you inspire others to improve and grow. You're the person we need to take this program to the next level." Sarah looked around the room, at the faces of the people who had watched her grow, and then at the faces of the team she had helped shape. This wasn't just about a promotion. It was about the journey, the lessons she had learned, the people who had supported her, and the company that had given her a second chance. "I'll accept," Sarah said, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "I'm ready." As she left the meeting room, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. The path to this moment hadn't been easy, and she had made her share of mistakes along the way. But now, she was standing at the threshold of something new. She had found her place, not just as an employee, but as a leader. Someone who had learned that growth doesn't come from avoiding mistakes, but from facing them head-on and using them to become better. And with that realization, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. As Sarah stepped into her new role as regional manager, the weight of the responsibility felt both thrilling and humbling. This was not just about overseeing operations or hitting performance targets. It was about maintaining the culture she had worked so hard to create. A culture rooted in respect, empathy, and a commitment to learning from mistakes. In her first few months, Sarah hit the ground running. She traveled between the locations under her supervision, meeting new teams, observing their challenges, and making sure that the core values she believed in were being instilled at every level. It wasn't always easy. There were always challenges. New staff members to train, difficult passengers to manage, and the occasional crisis to handle. But Sarah's approach was consistent. She wasn't just there to oversee the process. She was there to guide, to listen, and to lead by example. One afternoon, during a visit to one of the branches, Sarah noticed a young employee, Ben, struggling with a frustrated passenger. The passenger had missed his flight due to a delay and was now yelling at Ben, who looked visibly flustered. Sarah approached quietly, her presence almost unnoticed until she spoke. "Hey, Ben, how are we doing here?" she asked in a calm, reassuring tone. Ben glanced up, clearly relieved to see her. I'm trying to explain the situation, but he's not having it." Sarah nodded, understanding immediately. "It's okay. Take a step back. Let me handle this." She turned to the passenger, who was still ranting. Instead of meeting anger with anger, Sarah took a deep breath and spoke slowly, her voice steady. "Sir, I understand your frustration. I know how disappointing it can be when plans change unexpectedly, but I want to make sure we find a solution that works for you. Let me help you." By the end of the conversation, Sarah had managed to rebook the passenger and had even arranged for a complimentary meal voucher for his inconvenience. The passenger, though still upset, left the counter in a much calmer state. Ben watched in awe as Sarah handled the situation with ease. "You did great, Ben," Sarah said once the passenger had left. "Remember, it's not about solving every problem instantly. It's about showing people that we're here for them, no matter what." Ben nodded, visibly more confident. "Thanks, Sarah. I'll remember that." Sarah smiled, proud of the growth she had seen in him. Over time, her leadership began to leave a lasting impact on the team she worked with. Her approach, one built on respect, understanding, and constant learning, became a cornerstone of the company's culture. The employees she mentored went on to create similar, positive environments, and the ripple effect continued to spread. Sarah wasn't just managing operations. She was shaping the future of the airline, one interaction at a time. Years passed, and Sarah's journey continued to evolve. She had grown not just as a leader, but as a person. She had built a career founded on the lessons she had learned, lessons that were born from her mistakes, her failures, and her triumphs. She had seen how the airline had transformed under her guidance, with employees who embodied the principles she had championed. One day, as Sarah was walking through the terminal, a familiar face caught her eye. It was Mary Albright, the woman who had unknowingly set Sarah on this path all those years ago. Mary was walking toward her with a smile, a warm expression that conveyed nothing but kindness. "Sarah," Mary greeted her, her voice as calm and steady as it had been that first day at the counter. "I wanted to take a moment to thank you." Sarah smiled, somewhat surprised. "Thank me? For what?" "For everything," Mary replied. "When I gave you that second chance, I had no idea what would come of it. But I've watched you grow, and I've seen the impact you've had on this company, on its culture. You've created something lasting, something that I'm proud of." Sarah's heart swelled with gratitude. This was the moment she had waited for, the moment when everything came full circle. "I couldn't have done it without that second chance, Mary. It changed everything for me." Mary nodded. "Sometimes it takes a mistake to lead us to where we're meant to be. And from that mistake, you've built something incredible." For a moment, they both stood in silence, the weight of those words settling between them. Sarah realized that this encounter, this simple exchange, was a reminder of how far she had come. What had seemed like the end of her career years ago had turned into the beginning of a new path, one that had led her not only to success but to a deeper understanding of herself and the world around her. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," Mary said, her voice sincere. "You've shown that growth is possible for anyone, no matter their mistakes, and that's a legacy worth having." As Sarah walked away from the encounter, she reflected on everything that had led her to this point. The twists and turns of her journey had brought her here, to a place where she was no longer just a part of the system, but a leader who had created lasting change. Her mistakes, her challenges, and her triumphs had all played a part in shaping the person she had become. In the end, Sarah understood that leadership wasn't just about achieving success, it was about making an impact, inspiring others, and creating a culture that would continue to grow long after she was gone. The lessons she had learned would never fade. They had shaped her, and in turn, she had shaped the world around her. And as Sarah looked out at the bustling terminal, she knew that the ripple effect of her leadership would continue, growing, spreading, and inspiring others to make their own mark on the world.